The scene opens in a restaurant where a man called Tony expresses his love and proposes to his partner called Eve, who happily accepts. Everyone there cheered for them, so the new couple in town happily discussed their wedding plans excitedly, so the waitress came to give out their expense. Tony tries to search for his ATM card but couldn't find it, so Eve told he should let her pay for it, and she did it. Eve calls her friend Halima and gushes about how happy she is with Tony, expressing her deep affection and gratitude for him. Went to extend to tell her friend that he even proposed to her. The friends playfully banter about wedding plans and rings. The atmosphere is filled with joy, love, and anticipation as the couple looks forward to their future together. There comes Tony telling his two friends Ben and Philip about what happened in the restaurant, recounts a past experience where he pretended to be wealthy to impress Eve. Philip asked him if later she discovered that you are also not as financially stable as she thinks. What will you do? He advises him against deceit in relationships and encourages authenticity. The conversation then shifts to Eve discussing with Halima the idea of surprising her loved one and the excitement that comes with it. Tony expresses his concern about marrying someone wealthier than him, but the conversation ends with the group agreeing that love is worth embracing in all its forms. Eve went to Tony's house without informing him she was coming when she got there. Eve and her friend Halima heard a conversation of Tony telling his friends he doesn't love Eve. He went to great lengths to give her an expensive engagement ring despite not actually loving her. He explains that she saw this as an investment, as he believed that once she trusted him, everything she owned would belong to him. However, he also acknowledges that he may have been naive in this belief. Halima tries to console Eve and offer their perspectives on the situation, but Eve continues to express her feelings of being used for her money rather than being loved genuinely. The conversation ends with Eve expressing her belief that a broken relationship is better than a broken marriage and that she would rather not have married someone with such intentions. She is seen shedding tears for a man who has wronged her, but her friend encourages her to move on and focus on her own worth. Her friend reminds her that she deserves a man who loves her and that she should be happy that she found out about the man's true intentions early on. She also suggests ways for her to move forward and get the man out of her life. Throughout the conversation, her friends offer words of encouragement and support, reminding her of her strength and worth. So Halima told Eve that she has a plan to get rid of her boyfriend, so she told her what she will do, pretending that the house and the company are not hers. So her boyfriend told him he would be paying her a visit. Immediately he entered the house. Halima started accusing Eve of deceitfully claiming ownership of her house and her company, as well as wearing her clothes. Eve denies these allegations, but Halima insists that Eve has been pretending to be rich when she has nothing. Halima expresses her frustration and demands that Eve leave her house. Eve refuses, leading Halima to threaten to reveal Eve's true financial situation to everyone. The situation escalates, with both women becoming increasingly agitated and emotional. Eve ultimately decides to leave with the person filming and promises to return once Halima has calmed down. The argument ends with Halima expressing her happiness to her friend that she will soon be married and leaving the house. Eve expresses her disappointment and frustration towards Tony for ending their relationship, while he accuses her of deceit. Both parties exchange angry words, with Tony threatening physical violence if Eve follows him. The conversation shifts to discussing the financial losses incurred during the relationship with Ben and Philip, suggesting Tony should try to get his engagement ring back to recover some of his savings. The argument continues with the three individuals talking over each other and the conversation becoming increasingly chaotic. Tony expresses her concern for Eve, who has lied to him about having a place to stay. Philip suggests that Tony should call Eve to check on her, but Tony is hesitant, as she feels that Eve doesn't deserve her concern since she has lied. The two friends discuss the possibility of Tony inviting Eve to her own rundown apartment or continuing to deceive her. Eventually, Tony decides to call Eve to check on her well-being. He calls Eve. Eve expresses her concern about being brought to a place where there is no space for her and where she is not welcome. She told him that her friend Halima has asked their friends not to welcome her, and she has nowhere to sleep. So he asks her where she is now, and she says she is at her friend's house asking forgiveness. He told her she should wait for her at the street junction. He came to take her to his house. They enter a gate, and Eve becomes increasingly agitated as she questions Tony about the location of her house. She accuses him of lying and being a broken boy, and when she finally arrives at her house, she discovers that it is not the one she was expecting. The conversation ends with Eve expressing her confusion and frustration. Tony expresses her frustration over Eve's desire to leave their living situation, questioning why she would want to leave and accusing him of holding her back. Eve insists that she wants to leave and can do so at any time, but Tony continues to try and persuade her to stay, offering him a roof over his head. Eve expresses his desire for food and basic necessities, but Tony becomes defensive and insists that she can provide for her when he can. The conversation becomes increasingly heated, with both parties expressing frustration and misunderstandings. Eve expresses her discomfort with the bathroom, complaining about the lack of a cover and the presence of an open drain. She also voices her frustration over being served an empty plate of food, lacking chicken, fish, meat, or egg. The conversation then shifts to sleeping arrangements, with Tony refusing to sleep on the floor despite the bed being available. She becomes increasingly agitated as Tony touches her, insisting that the place is too hot for her body to be in close contact with him. Tony demands a pillow and becomes angry when Eve does not provide one, threatening to leave. The argument escalates further as Eve accuses Tony of not having a fan or a house of his own. She describes visiting his apartment to her friend Halima, which she finds unsatisfactory, and expresses her concern about his true intentions. Tony asks for the engagement ring. She also mentions the absence of her engagement ring and accuses him of trying to impress her with his wealth. The conversation becomes heated, with Eve expressing her hunger and frustration and the boyfriend suggesting that she cook for herself. He finds it absurd that she keeps asking him for items like noodles and eggs while he is trying to think. The conversation then shifts to the topic of a gas stove as Eve expresses her confusion over why it won't light up despite the gas coming out. After the cooking, Tony told Eve she should go and fetch water, and she finds it strange that he would ask her to carry a gallon and go with him. Overall, the conversation is filled with lighthearted banter and humor. Eve expresses frustration towards Tony, who refuses to carry 2 gallons of water despite the town's long distances for water collection. She then complains about mosquitoes, and he suggests she should act dead to avoid their bites. The conversation shifts to the house's lack of functionality, and they encourage each other to wake up and hustle. Tony teases Eve about her hygiene, and they continue to exchange playful insults. Throughout the conversation, they maintain a lighthearted and entertaining tone. Eve expresses her reluctance to go to the communal toilet and suggests carrying her there instead. Tony teases her about her fear of the compound people and urges her to hurry up. The conversation transitions into Eve expressing her desire to wake up early and appreciate the beauty of nature, leading to an upbeat chorus. Tony gave Eve money to cook. The food was ready when Tony was eating. He asked Eve the amount that she used to prepare the food. She said $16,300. Tony expresses his concern about the large amount of money, $16,300, spent on preparing food for one day, which he believes could have been used for a week's worth of meals. He argues that the cost of meat and other essentials on the market is high, and she cannot afford to buy them in large quantities. Eve defends her actions, stating that she trusts Tony and believes he can manage the resources. The conversation escalates as Tony accuses Eve of being a billionaire's daughter and living beyond his means. He advises her to buy only what she can afford and prioritize her nutrition. The argument ends with Tony suggesting that Eve should cut the large pieces of meat and leave the rest for him. Eve expresses her frustration over someone stealing her water while she was in the room, accusing an unidentified woman named Sarah of the theft. Sarah denies the accusation, and Eve becomes increasingly agitated, threatening to fight. The conversation escalates, with both women insisting that the other is at fault. Eve expresses her disbelief that such thefts occur in their community and laments the loss of her privacy. The argument ends with Tony deciding to apologize to Sarah to resolve the situation. They went to the market and hustled to get money, so they sold Puff Puff, and Eve happily sold it after the market, so on their way to the house. They discuss how market women make little profits from their sales and use it to feed their families. Tony also reflects on his past experiences with market women and how they were once living fake lives. Tony shares an encounter with a particular market woman who was shamelessly selling her wares and admits that she was impressed by her confidence. The conversation then shifts to Tony's first encounter with Eve, where she lied to him, and they both agree that they have all lived fake lives at some point. The conversation ends with a reflection on the importance of authenticity and the future. The scene shifts to the first time they both meet each other. Eve had mistakenly thought that Tony's car was his, leading to an awkward interaction where he asked for her number instead of Eve asking him to move his car. He confesses that he didn't want to reveal that the car wasn't his, as she didn't want to reveal his worth. However, he was attracted to Eve's cool demeanor and soft-spoken nature. The conversation then shifts to Eve, expressing his concern about Tony's feelings for her and Tony, assuring him that he is observing him closely. The interaction ends with Tony complimenting Eve's appearance, and she thanks him for the compliment. He apologizes for his past actions and promises to provide her with anything she desires. However, Eve's current boyfriend emphasizes his integrity and insists that she deserves better than him. Tony then shares his current endeavors, including selling snacks and learning coding to develop an app for the average Nigerian. He admits that he kept these activities hidden due to their previous deceitful lifestyle. When asked about his future plans, Tony expresses his desire to become a husband. So Eve told her friend about it, but she told her friend to do something for her by letting him fall for her. Tony was walking on the street where he saw that a car had stopped in front of him. He waited for the person to come from the car, and he realized it was Halima. She claimed to seduce him with her words, despite being the CEO of a company and feeling exhausted. She reveals that her friend, whom he had proposed to, had been using her for financial gain, but Tony insists that he only likes Eve. When the friend returned, insisting on a surprise visit, Eve and her partner played along to discover the truth. However, during this separation, Tony realized his deep feelings for her partner and acknowledged that it was not about the money, but her love for him. Eve brought Tony back to the house where she was before she was moved out, and she properly introduced Halima to her as a childhood friend, and confesses everything to him, saying that everything was planned. Eve is not poor, but rich. Tony became speechless. Tony and Eve express their love and appreciation for each other, emphasizing that it's not about material possessions, but the kindness and warmth of one's heart. Tony explains everything to his friends. They sing and rap about living life to the fullest and not letting anything hold them back. And also will talk to Eve if they will get an investor who will invest in the app they develop. Later in the conversation, Eve shares that she only spoke to them about her tech business, but they were convinced to invest. The exchange ends with expressions of gratitude and the belief that more money brings more progress and love. Tony is certain that his love for Eve is his whole world and that he cannot be happy without her. He asks for her hand in marriage for the second time, to which she happily agrees. The couple expresses their deep connection and their belief in the perfection of their love, comparing it to the beauty of flowers.